Hey yo, let's see. Do we have audio? Okay, it doesn't look muted from my side, so I'm gonna hope it's not muted for you all. What's up, people? Thank you for following Rhythm Scout 1 and Ricardo DS. What's up, Jon Sugar? Jon, do you know that we're going to be reviewing your pull request on Lambo as the first thing we do today? Are you ready for this? That's what we're going to do. So hey everybody, what we are working on is something called Lambo. Lambo is a command line tool previously written in bash shell scripts for making a new Laravel app, but it doesn't just do what Laravel new does, it also does a lot of other stuff like setting up your Git and setting up your .env files correctly, and just basically the way I think that the beginning of every Laravel project should get started, and it allows you to customize it a little bit. So we are in the middle of rewriting it from shell scripts to PHP using something called Laravel Zero, which is basically, hey Marissa, which Laravel Zero is basically just Laravel. It's the Laravel source code modified a little bit to work well for command line apps. So last week we last time we worked on allowing you to customize which browser you're using to open it. And we left some to-dos for next time, so I moved them over to this one. And so these are our to-dos from last time, but first we're going to start by reviewing a pull request that Jon Sugar did. He said he's down a gallon of whiskey to dull the embarrassment. And so there's a pull request here where the goal of this, let's see, is to implement make config and edit config. So I'll rename this real quick and then talk through what those do. So implement make config and edit config commands in Lambo Zero. Okay, so for anyone who's not familiar with this general concept, what this does is, so hey Bogdanovich, welcome back. What this does is if you are, working with Lambo, the way it normally works is you're going to say Lambo new my project, and then you're going to pass flags like editor equals Sublime or something like that. But you don't want to have to do that every time. And so there's a concept called a config file where and I can't remember exactly where, hey, thanks for subscribing, Daniel Vigueras, somewhere like basically .lambo/after or something like that. And here you go. It runs all of these things every time. And so for example, whenever I run Lambo, I do this, although I have to modify it because these things are a little bit different. Actually, no, these are the same ones. So every time I do it, I will basically do the normal Lambo installation process and then also do whatever I want to do here. And it gives some examples of how to copy files over. For example, if you have like a config file for your code sniffer or something like that, every time it does that. But the thing is, you don't have that file by default. Lambo doesn't have a concept of like automatically installing that. So the things we need are to be able to make it and to be able to edit it. Oh, sorry, that's after. I meant config. So sorry, after we will do another time, after runs these scripts. Config is similar, except all those parameters that we're passing in here, you can instead define them all in here. John says, I realized there was no point of implementing make edit config. The config isn't honored, so I'm going through and making sure they're used. All right. Jonas, hello, Chmat. The PR is in draft. Hey, Uruguay. Hello, Lblog Dburexis. Burforexis. Thanks for hanging out. So sorry for everyone. I mixed up the after file and the config file. So is it Angel or Angel? I'm going to guess it's Angel or something similar to that. That would be better if I was good at pronouncing Spanish. Okay, so John wrote this whole thing about basically what he's doing here. He talked about trying to follow the existing patterns. He tried to use the shell-based implementation of Lambo as inspiration for these. He says, make config and edit config are just aliases of the same command that takes care of all the logic. And interestingly, one of the things I would think about there is people don't want to have to think about whether or not they have the file. But furthermore, people also probably don't want to think about whether or not they have all the correct parameters in the file. And it kind of might be worth thinking about just getting rid of make config entirely and just having like a config or edit config or something like that that creates the file if it doesn't exist, adds any keys that you might be missing, and then opens up an editor. But let's just kind of take this one step at a time, but that's kind of how I think about it. He also mentions the fact that right now we open the editor one way. So this $editor command line variable is something that you should have available in most, but not all things. I don't know who has it and doesn't have it, whether it's Linux versus Mac versus Windows or something like that. But in general, if your command line thing is going to open something in an editor, you can just open it in $editor, and most of the time it will work, but not always. So he's saying it is difficult to get that $editor command line variable in PHP. Okay. So he's saying using the shell editor is a non-starter. Okay, cool. So we'll allow that to be the case anyway. Hey, Larry, Happy New Year to you too. So let's take a look at this code and see how it treats us. All right, so a reminder, the way Lambo works is, helps to open Lambo. There's a single command called new command, and you pass all your parameters in here, and then what it does is it basically builds its signature of like what are the parameters you can pass based on this options class. This options class defines all the different potential parameters you can pass in, and it builds a signature from that. And then the handle thing sets some global configs, checks to make sure you passed a parameter with the name of the application, and then it creates it. And creating it basically is just taking a whole bunch of actions: verify the paths available, verify the dependencies are available, running the Laravel installer, opening up in the editor. And so each of these is really just one of the pieces of the pie, and we separated them out into these action classes here. We should add Lambo to the TLDR helper. We totally should, Jake. John, I had the same idea to provide just the one command aside. Okay, cool. Yeah, so we'll talk about that. All right, so what we've done so far all lives in this new command. But if you look at Lambo, there's actually commands other than that. So there's the make config, the edit config, the make after, the edit after. So unlike the work we were doing before, so this right here, this is actually the old Lambo. You can tell because it's Lambo my application, whereas the one we're building right now, which is /Lambo, it's going to be Lambo new my application. So everything we did last time all lives in this new command. Today we're going to be working in, at least at the beginning, in a different command. The name of the mic is the Shure SM7B, S-H-U-R-E. And yeah, Jake's talking about TLDR, which I just installed recently and like a lot. So we're actually going to get out of here and go over to his pull request, which is much more normal, just commands as you would be working with Laravel Zero. You're just creating commands. So, okay, so let's read through what this does. Create or edit config, it's the same command, which is good. He looks up what the configuration paths. Remember, I mentioned that all of our configs live in ~/.lambo, so he's setting that path up. You're welcome. And then he's saving the config in a JSON file, whereas previously it was saved in a ini style. So if we are going to make it JSON, then we're going to have to provide a converter for people who are using the old version, which is fine if we want. If the file exists, then it opens it. If the file doesn't exist, then it makes the directory, puts it, and then also opens it. I'm curious why return 0. So John, since I actually have you on the stream, I'll just ask you that question. What made you want to do return 0? Is that something specific for CLI or what? Okay, so this is the same. So note, this is Mac thing is something that we had, and even this, I think this XDG open stuff right here, I think we had done this elsewhere. So this is something we may choose to extract out. Because I'm pretty sure that is Mac is to helper. Okay, app console editor. So this is how you mentioned you're not sure what editor to use, and so you're allowing them to customize which editor they can pass in. So if we're not on Mac, then you're going to say XDG open that file. And then if we are on Mac and you've defined the editor, then you're going to open up the file with editor. Otherwise, you're just going to use Mac open. So what happens if you just hit open? Open Lambo config like that. Okay, so it opens whatever you have that thing assigned to by default, which is not that bad, honestly. I mean, if somebody wants Sublime, then they'll have those things, you know, set that way. And it's not like it read the file ending off of /config, so that's not bad. I don't think. I wonder where Mac gets that definition from. For just maybe that's what I have assigned to just files where Mac does not know how to understand what file it is. Yours opens in text edit. Okay. So then we have this config file template, which is the basic version of this. So this right here, I would do, if we're doing JSON, let's instead make this an array and JSON encode it as we save. Okay. I'll probably refactor this a little bit once we pull it down, but we're just going to read it first. Why can't server editor be used? That should be set in CLI automatically. PHPR var dump server editor seems to work at least. Maybe I missed something. Well, that's worth trying. Jon, would you mind running that on yours and seeing if that works for you? One of the things is that Jon mentioned in his thing that he was eventually able to get this, but then when he tried to run it, it said something about can't run Vim in a shell or something like that. And one of the things is that when you run processes from this, there's a limit to the processes that you can run, like shell processes you can run. And so that might be the problem we're running into there, is that it won't let you do it. But I'm not sure, so we'll have to take a look. Customize.env. Not sure why these are being modified here. Oh, maybe because you're making it so they can be customized in the config. Is that right? DB username, yeah, DB username and password can be customized from the config. So one thing we have to make sure is if this is happening, then the new command is being modified to set those. Okay, so you move set config out to another class. So you can merge the passed in config with the config file stuff. And get database username. Sorry, everybody, I know I'm jumping around just a little bit. If it's passed in, use it. Otherwise, okay, cool. And then it defaults to root and defaults. Okay, cool. All right, so come back here. Okay, so we already had this config stuff happening in our existing one, but remember it was happening in the new command as its own method called setConfig. So one of the things that Jon did was moved this thing, which is now going to be a lot more complicated because it's not just pulling based on the passed in arguments, it's also pulling based on reading that file. So he appropriately thought, oh, it's probably going to be good for me to pull this out to another class so we can kind of extract that work a little bit. And that's now an action called setConfig. So where's this saved config? All right, so this is pulling it out of here, but I think I saw it somewhere else. I'm seeing it in new command, and I don't think it's actually needed in new command because I'm sure that you added it there, and then once you extracted set config, then it doesn't need to be there anymore. All right. So one of the things that we had as a task in the future was to fix this problem that if you make your shortcode lowercase n, it's an error. I don't know if making it capital N is going to be the right fix, but I understand why you did that. Okay, so we've got enough for us to understand the basics of how it works. I'm not looking at this and saying, though, this is totally awful. So let's open this up and start actually playing around with it. I'll submit the review real quick. All right, so let's pull this down locally. All right, and what we are going to be testing now is the make config. Let's just do edit config. So let's assume we're going to get rid of make config. Yeah, thank you so much for putting this PR in, Jon. I really appreciate your work on that. I didn't need to drink any booze for that. That was very good. All right, so let's assume that we're going to get rid of make config entirely, right? All we want is edit config. So let's search for make config. Any references for it anywhere? Maybe it was it? I think that's what his name. Okay. So this command right here allows you to pass in a certain one. It says add a config file, new config file is created if one does not already exist. Then all it does, so it's handling it. Yeah, okay, we're binding the console in, and then we're triggering our action. So the triggering action is create or edit. All right, so for starters, I would say let's assume that we're not going to use JSON so that we don't have to force existing users to switch. What would it look like for us to build this exact same structure from an any file? Does anybody know if there's a really easy and convenient way for PHP to read an any format thing as basically an array? Is that what parse any file does? Yep, an associative array. Cool. So let's just try this right now. Let's just see how this treats us. Lambo edit config. Oh, it's the hyphen edit hyphen config. So let's see if make hyphen config is anywhere still or not. All right, yeah, because I put it in the help screen. Let's get rid of it in the help screen and get rid of it on the README. All right, take two. Syntax error, unexpected bang. Where did I put a bang? Oh, the bang is on the config file because my config, Lambo config, has this here, which I'm not actually sure why it has that. My assumption is that I did that so that you could just run it and it would just pull these things all into your thing. So for right now, I'm just going to basically take this file and, well, I was going to say take this file and drop off this thing. I really want it to work for people without having to be, without them having to run some kind of converter if at all possible. That's my focus here. So let's take a look here and look at, does the default after file actually have that that stuff there? Yeah, it does. Oh, sorry, I keep getting after and config mixed up because I don't really know why config has that. Again, it's probably because that way we can just run it as a bash script. Yeah. Woof. Yeah, I just don't like anything that makes a modification and runs that test every single time. Thanks for following Pyjango. Oh, Python and Django. I would prefer it work without a conversion step, if at all possible. It's not always possible, but I would like that. I wonder if you can run parse any file on something that you've modified yourself, so that we can actually like get rid of the that thing and then run it. Because right now it's looking for a file name. Sometimes in PHP, if you've got a parse any file, you've got a parse any string. There we go. Okay, so what we're going to do right now, for now, is basically make a normalize any file for now. And I don't know where I want this to end up, but I'm just going to do this for now. So load and clean any file. So we're basically going to, do we need this config file path later? We probably do, right? Yeah, okay. So in case anybody doesn't follow me on Twitter, I jammed my finger really bad, so I'm having trouble typing today. So even more trouble than usual. So I have to work really slowly over there so I don't hit too many characters. All right, so config file path. And then we got to go through all these. See, I'm trying to look at them and see how many of them will need redoing. Oh, what happened? Oops, that was the one I wanted to not do, is this one right here. Okay, I think I'm getting a little bit distracted here. I'm having trouble going from piece to piece. So let's figure it out how I would want to do it. So we know our path. Okay, so do we use config path anywhere? We do use config path. All right, so I think the first thing I want to do is just basically ensure that the file exists. It's like kind of think about your exceptions and handle your exceptions first. So what are our exceptions? So make file and directory if they do not exist. Okay, so let's do this. Actually, ensure path exists. Oh, ensure file exists. Oh no, let's just do path. Sorry, everybody. Config path. And we may decide that this is actually a terrible way to do it. And so we're going to have this ensure path exists. Config path. I know you did that, but I'm just, so sometimes what's important is for my brain to understand everything is to put it in the order I want it, and then to take your code and put it in the place that makes the most sense for my brain. Otherwise, I won't be able to think about how I want to architect it, because there's both my brain trying to process this and then my brain trying to process what I want all at the same time. And so sometimes it takes me rewriting something somebody else has done in order to process how I want it done. All right, so if file doesn't exist, config path, make directory, config path. Cool. So that's what ensure path exists does. So we've got it here. All right, so now we need to ensure the file exists. Fair enough, took me a while to process. Yeah, it's just, there's something about internalizing somebody else's thinking. All right, so this right here is the ensure file exists aspect, sort of. Ensure, what did I name it? File exists. Now this one's a little bit different because we're not just ensuring that it exists, we're also ensuring config file exists. We actually don't need to take this as a parameter anymore because we have set it here. So let's just do this. Thanks, Arena Web Dev. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second. So ensure file exists does not actually need to be passed a property at all, because ensure config file exists here. Let's see. Hold on, let me pull in. I'm still struggling with VS Code a little bit. I want the, how do I search within here to say give me the facade version of file? Does that even exist? None of these. How do I import the facade? Oh, it's already up there. So why is it erroring on me? Oh, it's because, no, wait, config file path. Okay, let's save it. Create or edit config. And see what it's farting about. Okay. How do I see the error? Oh, it's TLint. Oh, okay. Well, we don't need that. We don't need quotes around it. Okay. So what's the farting here then? Probably the space after that. Yeah, okay, cool. Great. All right. Stepping back. Make file and directory if does not exist. So that's going to happen here. So let's figure out our config path, and let's just do this. Why not? Just for speed and safety and consistency. And that way we're not always passing these things around. So ensure path exists is no longer a method you're going to run on any path. It's now a method we're running on config path, which means it should now be named ensure config path exists. Okay, so config path and config file path have now been set. I kind of think I want to run those in the constructor. Gosh, typing with taped fingers. the one thing I don't know is with commands in Laravel Zero, how different are, when is this running and is this ever going to be a bad decision? But if this can work, to me this is more setup, so I want it to be in construct instead of invoke if possible. Okay, so make file directory if do not exist. So ensure path exists, ensure config file exists. But interesting, we're not just ensuring that it exists, we're ensuring it exists with the right properties. And I think this will also be the place where if it does exist, but it's missing some of the properties, we'll also modify them there. So I think I need a better name. Undefined, because it's got a different name, config. So I kind of want to rename ensure config file exists to something different, but I'm not sure what. All right, so file put this config path, this config file template, which down here we'll get to in just a second. All right, so they both exist, so we don't have to check this anymore. And now we can just open it. So this is now a much cleaner invoke. Make sure the path exists, make sure the file exists, send a console notice, and then open it up. And that's it. Even this edit config is really just edit. And then we don't need to pass this because we already have it. And then this. Okay, and so all we're really saying is, well, actually, now that I am not passing something in, I do want to name it edit config file. Save yourself time, fun plus tab. If you mean, do you mean function like that? Wait, it's, oh, that was cool. Nice. Yeah, I'm new to VS Code in case anybody doesn't know that, so. All right, so let's just clean this up. All right, so what do we have? The constructor sets our properties. The invoker basically checks. So honestly, ensuring config path exists is really a part of ensuring config file exists to me. So let's do this. And we'll have to do that in a second, but let's step back from this a second. Okay, so now we're just making sure it's set up, and then we're notifying it, and then we're opening it. So what does making sure it's set up look like? It is making sure that the path exists. Why does it keep doing that? Oh, VS Code must be getting rid of that space for me. Make the directory, and then put the values of config file path. Now, this, I actually think that this, we can't file put every time. We only want to file put if the file does not exist. So this right here, like this, if file exists, config file path, then file put it. Otherwise, we'll be overwriting it every time. Okay, so this I was saying I want to JSON encode an array, but I think I'd rather do it with an INI if possible. So well, okay. There is one clean way to do what you're saying, John, being there's a clean way to convert it, which is basically to convert so if the file exists, then I want to upgrade INI config file. Man, this is I'm nervous about this, about running an upgrade step every time. But okay, let's try it. Just this should really have a different name. Can anybody think of a better name for ensure config file exists? What I really want to do is just like get it in the right shape. Because we want to make sure the path exists, we want to make sure the file exists, and we want to set it. Do the rest of the PR first, and then we can burn time on this. Yeah, well, the problem is this won't work for me right now, so I can't really test it very easily because of that. So here's what we'll do. Copy Lambo config as Lambo config.ini. Okay, so now we can remove Lambo config, and now we can work with it as if ini upgrade to JSON. Okay, so let's assume it's going to be JSON for now. I'm not 100% sure that's what I want, but let's assume that we do. So that means this right here needs to be return. I'm not a big fan of type hints and return type hints most of the time. So JSON encode, and then array of this. So these. Now, this is a moment where we are going to notice that Matt has trouble with multi-select in VS Code on every single stream. So let's see if I have that same problem on this one. Hey, it worked for once. All right, so these are our default parameters here. I want that to be null, so hopefully that doesn't cause a problem for us. Okay, so let's just try running this and see how it treats us. See if it breaks everything. Lambo edit config. Okay, syntax error. That means that down here I have an extra or not enough closing. Well, actually, somewhere I have not enough closing braces or something. Something here is not closed correctly. What is not closed? Last method. Thanks, Arena Web. Oh, it's missing its closing brace. Thanks. All right, opening existing config file. It opens it in text edit, just like you're saying. That's interesting. Thanks for following. So Tyrus791. Okay, so obviously text edit sucks, so we don't want that. But it did create the file in JSON, and so that all worked correctly. So let's let's go make a change to it. And make sure, ooh. Oh, pretty print. That's why. Let's delete it, and then let's run the command again. There we go, okay. Yeah. So let's save it with configuration, and then make sure that configuration doesn't get overwritten. Okay, configuration doesn't get overwritten. Cool. So we are TDD. Okay, Richard, show me how to TDD command line stuff because, oh, you might not have been here last time. One of the things I mentioned on this is that all these things would be a lot easier to TDD than run it and on your actual command line and then do it. The problem is writing tests around file manipulation on your actual thing using the Symfony process components is something that I don't have a ton of experience with, and so I invited other people to join in helping me understand how to do that well, so we can switch to a more tested. It's not just TDD. The amount of tests in this code base is pretty crap. So basically, what I have done is only test the things that don't touch the file system at all. Now I know how to mock file systems, but the work we're doing here is primarily not about mocking file systems, but instead about actually running commands like shell scripts and stuff like that. So one of the things we've talked about is the possibility of mocking this shell thing that I created, which is one of the reasons why I created it that did, and just asserting, you know, like having it expect certain things passed a certain way. So, but yeah, TDD not happening right now. But again, I welcome education from anybody about how to do a better job of testing when you're dealing with Symfony process components. So, and file systems and stuff like that. Okay, cool. So back to not being judged. We've got this file. All right, so what were we going to do next? All right, so one of the things I had noted in the pull request review is this is Mac thing is shared across another thing, so we might want to turn that into a utility somewhere. But at least we're at a point where this works basically. So we have to handle this upgrade thing. So let's take a look at the rest of the PR to see what else needs reviewing before we call this one done. Also, this whole thing's open source, so anybody is welcome to pull in some tests, to pull request some tests on this to get us kind of set the example of how to do that well. All right. thumbs up. If anybody's on Linux, so one of the things to solve here is, so let's actually look at this. Things to do either later or later in this calls, solve how to open config. Thanks for subscribing, Lucas. With a desirable editor, not text edit. Test. This is so hard to type with this finger wrapped up. Holy crap. File manipulation commands like edit. Config. Hey, Martin. Okay. So one of the things we'd want to test is one of the things we want to test here is the set config things. Let's go review set config as a class and see how it works. All right, so reminder for anybody who wasn't here at the beginning of the stream, this thing right here is going to essentially merge two things, which is the configuration file, which is what we're working on right now, and then the arguments that somebody passed in, and end up generating this Lambo.store, which is what all the rest of the actions rely on. So basically, you run Lambo new whatever, and it merges these two, and then everything else accesses this Lambo.store. A lot of this work here is coming from the work that was previously done in new command, and Jon extracted it out to its own command. All right, so proxying, argument getting, and option getting from the console, which is good. These ones are copied over from. Oh, these are merged. Okay, so yep, protocol base path. There's some code style things here I want to correct real quick. All right, one of the things I'm noticing here is that we have a lot of duplication of how to represent paths. And so I think I'm going to create a class to represent paths. Unless I want to put in utilities. No, let's call it paths. So we're going to make a new PHP class. Paths.php. .php. Okay, am I not going to create? What's going on here? New file, yes. Relative product. Oop. New file, relative product root. First, select an existing path to create relative. Oh, this is so strange. Okay. All right, so basically, as I'm imagining it here, we're going to pull this out of the container most of the time. And then we're going to basically just have name paths. So one of the paths would be config file. One of the paths would be after file. Oh my goodness, I can't type. One of the paths would be config directory, I guess. I'll call it dir for now. Trying to think, are there other things that we've been referring to here? So we referred on quite a few here. So let's do config path, which is really going to be config dir, and then config file is going to be, typing is hard, config dir adding slash config. And then after file will be the same thing. Oh, that's one of the problems, is that we're talking about these config files versus .json files. Blah. Okay. Config after .json. So this creative edit config, its file name is actually going to be .json, and then this thing right here is really going to be if any upgraded JSON and rename. Yeah, I thought about path separator. I actually have not yet hit a moment where using path separator matters, even on multiple different, like I'm moving over to Windows or anything like that. But if anybody here has actually hit a point where path separator is necessary, let me know and I can start using it. But I used to use path separator all the time, and someone somewhere told me that doesn't actually matter. But I don't know that for absolute truth. For what it's worth, this is also not meant to be used on Windows, so that's actually doesn't matter. So never mind. Yeah, but yeah, thanks, Reno Web Dev. Okay, so what are our paths? We might even not need a constructor now I think about it. Config-dir, config file after file. So this config path equals paths. What did I call it? Config-dir, I think. Paths config-dir. Is that one, and then config file path. Do we even need config path anywhere? Yeah, we do, because we need to make sure that exists. And this is going to be paths config path config file, and then use facades /app/paths. If anybody's not familiar, that's a real-time facade. All it does is basically when I call paths here, it gets this out, resolves this out of the container, and then allows me to statically access it. So this right here, that would be the exact same thing as just saying this config path. And every time I use a real-time facade, I have to go back and say, is it really that much better than just doing new paths config-dir? Because that's exactly what we're doing here. And I think it's fine. So love the sound of the keyboard. Out of interest, what one do you have? So V Mitchell, static methods, Jon Sugar makeup. Yeah, so instead of static, I'm doing real-time facades, which is the same as if I was making them static. This is a Kinesis Advantage 2. I need one of those uses pages that everybody's been making. So I think they're brown switches. That looks brown. All right, so those paths are set. Why is this path's undefined type? Oh, sorry, telephone. All right, so that's that. Let's see. So we have paths in here. Config file path equals, and now this is going to be paths config file. And then we're going to do that same real-time facade. Use facades /app/paths, and then set config. Yeah, I mean, if there's no real-time facades in Laravel Zero, then we'll just, new it up and just use it from there. All right, so this is basically importing the config. So I think this, I would say, so do we need config file? No, we don't. So really what we want is this, I don't know what to call it, existing config equals this existing config. Typing is hard with taped up fingers. And then we're going to have a config file path, config file path. Okay, cool. So we're getting the config file, and if the file exists, then we're decoding it, and if the file doesn't exist, we're backing it up and just saying, oh, nothing. Cool. All right. We're getting the TLD here. Now this right here is left over from existing work, so there's nothing. Well, I was gonna say there's nothing different, but it is a little bit different. All right. So I don't like the fact that multiple things are having to look this up. Oh no, sorry. This is different config. This is Valley config. But this right here, this is where we're. Oh yeah, no. So this is all. Sorry, this is all Valley config. This has been here all along. Nothing has been changed here. Okay, great. Get base path option versus saved config. Okay, so basically all these things are saying give me this versus that versus the other, the fallback. So I'm very tempted. Typing's hard with ergonomic. Typing's easy with ergonomic keyboards unless you have your fingers all taped up. If you only use once the method called, you need to store it in a var like TLD. TLD is used more than once. it's used down here as well. That's the only reason we did that. So, okay. So existing config is set to existing config. And then, ooh, what are you doing here? I must have hit some vim bar or some get bar accidentally. All right, so what I'm thinking about right now is there a good and clean pattern for all these things that are going to say, if the option is set, use the option. If the thing is set in the config, use the config. Normally, I would just say, just do a really simple method that just says like get with, you know, get parameter. The problem is they're not always named the same, and the fallbacks information might not be the same. That said, I still kind of think that I want to do it. So let's just try and make a function. Get so option command line name. Obviously these are nasty variables, but I'm just trying to think through how to structure this thing first. Option config file name. So the fact that those are inconsistent is definitely one of the pain points here. So I was going to extract them in a method because they're doing the same thing, but then we need a callback as well, for example, base path. Yeah, so here let me write this out and see if it makes any sense first. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out. So let's say we were doing base path, which is one of the more complicated ones. So if this option command line name, then return this option command line name. If array has this, I think I renamed it to not saved config, but existing config. Option config file name, then return AR get this existing config option config file name. And so right now, what's the problem? ARR colon class. All right, so let's rewrite this one to see if it's any better. If this equals this get option value home dir. Oh yeah, and also I was going to say here. And if option config file name, oops, equals so that you don't have to pass two if they're the same. So if value equals this get option value home dir, and they're the same in both, right? It's home dir. Oh no, it's not. Oh, it's not home dir. It's path. Sorry, and it's path in both. When you pass the option, it's path, and when you save it in the config, it's path. So we only have to pass in one parameter. Then return string replace. And we're replacing tilde, which is just this, and this is totally separate from what we're writing here. This is just the fact that if somebody passes in a base path, it doesn't resolve the tilde for you, and so we have to manually resolve the tilde for them. Config home dir, and then value. Great. Actually, even, oh no, yeah, okay. Otherwise, return get CWD. And so this method at least got cleaned up quite a bit by that get option value helper. Okay, what do you don't like about expected 3? Right, because I put my parens in the wrong place. Okay, so the get base path got cleaned up a whole bunch by that. Get protocol, we currently don't have the ability to work with right now. So let's see if it cleans up the rest of them. And I assume that they're all going to be something like this, where you basically say, if it happens, then return it. Otherwise, return a default. So what's our default for a database username? It's root. What's the option value we're getting? It's db user if you're looking in the command line, but if you're looking in the config file, it's db username, which it might be worth just making them always the same, but let's figure out, let's assume there's a good reason for them to be different. And then in most of them, we don't need that. We just need return value. And then if there's nothing, then return root. And that's it. So most of them will probably be like that. They're not actually performing any manipulation on the value. That's the, seems like you can type the letters A to Z without looking at the keyboard. I hope I can. That's the other issue. I was thinking about whether we should make config and command line keys the same. Yeah, definitely something to think about. Let's actually add that as a note of things to consider. Consider making the config file and command line properties have the same names to help consistency. I think that's definitely something worth considering, and that would also simplify this method. All right, so if so this one's called db password on the command line, and it's called db password in the config file, which is just another smell, and then return that. Okay, great. And then, all right, okay, cool. So those ones are cleaned up. I want to turn this into a single line. Can we make this a single line? Return this, blah, 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 and then one of those PHP 7.4 things, right? Like, does that work the same way? I always get mixed up between that and then this and that. I think this is it. If this is non-null, then return this, otherwise return this. I think that's what it is. However, I do need to, well, yeah, I think that's okay. Will that work? Only I knew PHP better. Project currently specifies, actually, so double question marks is okay. It's not, this is the one that's PHP 7.4, but this one I believe is available in 7.2. We can just go check. So what are we testing? Oh, I want a quick preview, not eval. Blah. But look, it works in 7.2. So go team. Oh no, I just dropped water on my keyboard. Cool. So it works. Another option is to give the default value to get option value return. Yeah, I did think about that. No, Jonas did. I forget the name of it, that the null coalescing assignment operator actually assigns it to something. Yeah, exactly. But that's not what we're doing right now. And you know, that's I think the problem, Nuno, with the idea of passing the default to get option value, is that you get into that circumstance where some of them will have the second parameter and some of them won't, but all of them will have a third parameter, and it just starts feeling kind of gross. And that would be solved, again, by the fact that we really shouldn't have to do this. Hey, Sam, welcome, dude. We shouldn't have to do this whole thing where we're passing two different versions of it. And so, again, I think that this whole thing would be served well by allowing that fallback option. Even this one, well, no, this one wouldn't work because you have to run a callback on the values that doesn't get run on the default one. Okay, so get option value. Also, you all are probably noticing this. Like, I don't make anything private unless it's got to be private. Nobody's going to do something evil with this. So by default, if there's something that's not going to do something bad, I'm like, well, something else might want to use it later, and you know, testing it might be easier this way. So what the hey? Okay. I think this is pretty good. So we pull in the existing configuration, and then when we ask for those things that would be affected by the existing configuration, which is in this circumstance, base path, database username, and database password, then we pull them in a way that allows us to get them from the existing one. I wonder if, you know, we could actually just do this. Look at that. That's not that bad. Oh, what am I doing? Password, DB password. Is it DB user or username? I think it's DB user, yeah. Cool, look at that. Default password should be empty string. Thanks. I copied it over like that. Matt's triggering my method visibility OCD. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious. It should be obvious to anybody here that I write a very specific style of PHP, and it's very like I'm deleting return type hints and stuff like that, and that's not always the right way. Everybody to each his own and stuff like that. But this is my own personal project, and so I get to code the way I prefer here. So I think there's still some cleaning up needs done here, but my brain is having a little bit of trouble following everything right now. So the only arguments we're getting out of here are project name. We have this option thing. Oh, options are being got here. Okay, cool. So never mind, we need both. Okay, so let's see if there's anything else in his pull request that we need to review. Did I delete that unnecessary thing in new command? I think this is going to complain about, yeah. No string interpolation without braces, says Teatland. Okay, so I think oh yeah, so there's this one thing. So we were talking about the fact that Lambo Zero and or Symfony doesn't allow you to have a short parameter that is n. So Jon fixed it by doing capital N. I don't like that, but I don't like the fact that I didn't have it fixed otherwise. So we need to figure out a way to do that. One of the things I'm going to look at is what happens if we just get rid of the short code on this one. Did I build it in such a way where that's viable? Probably not, but let's just see what happens. Oh, I did, yeah, because all these ones don't have shortcodes. Yeah, so what's that extension? I have no idea. It's a Git-related extension, but I don't know exactly what. So right now we're just going to get rid of it. We're just going to get rid of the end shortcode, and that's going to be the way we're going to solve it, because I don't think people tend to use those. I think the command line ones are really much less commonly used than the config, so I don't want to kill ourselves on it. All right, so that means readme is the only one we need to change for that. All right, so I think that's solved. All right, so I kind of think, in case you can't see it, Marissa said it's GitLens. Make a J for JavaScript. That's an interesting idea. I might do that. Right now, let's just keep it in Node, but I'll definitely think about that. All right, so let's look at what we've done to see if I left anything just kind of sitting around. I am having so much trouble focusing that I can't even see which one of these is GitHub. There we go. Okay, so what do? We refactored the edit config. We still need to solve this whole thing about okay, so there's a couple steps there actually that we need. So let's leave these as to-dos. This is ensure config file has all the right keys. And if not, add the additional keys with appropriate defaults. Convert old.ini config files into new.json config files. All right, so okay. And one of the things that Jon mentioned earlier was ensure that all config file variables It's not awful at all, man. It's a great PR. Okay, refactoring. Okay, so what have we done here? We have refactor set config, or set config. We have refactor edit config, delete make config. This is an overly large pull request that does too many things, but I'm okay with that because we're at the spiking stage right now. This is not all super well tested. We're still figuring things out, and nobody's using this code right now. And this is the time where I'm least picky about this sort of a thing. Extract paths logic into paths class. And actually, let's check to make sure there's no paths used in new command. Oh my gosh, it's 12. I have to go to a doctor's appointment in a couple minutes. So I'm actually going to not be able to. Wow, I thought we had a whole bunch more time left. Jeez. Well, thank you all for hanging out. Thank you, Jon Sugar, for this great pull request. Thank you, all of you, for your really helpful feedback. This has been a really fun one. I can't believe it went so fast. I will finish writing this all up, and as always, I'll edit it together and put it online and link it out on Twitter and put all the notes up there. And I'm also going to push this up to Jon's branch so we can keep working on this. There's a good chance, just so everyone knows, that Jon and I will finish this PR later. We will, by the time we get to next week, we'll be working on something else. So expect that this is the last you're going to see of this edit config concept. We'll probably be back on the new command next week. And next week, we might even be done enough to release this as the new version of Lambo. We will see. Thanks so much for joining, Aaron and everybody else, and I will see you all later. Gotta run. I massively prefer Mac OS X. I'm at StaufferMatt on Twitter if you want to ask me more about that or show up to another stream. I wish I didn't have to run because I could tell you more about that, but yeah, massively.